X.
Hello and welcome. You're listening to Exposure on Radio X. I'm John Kennedy and I've got a very special show for you tonight. An Exposure classic album playback, The Verve, Urban Hymns in full, with two of the people behind the album to talk us through it track by track. Nick and Simon, hello.
Hello.
Hi.
It's good to see you.
Yeah, thank you. Good to see you too.
It's a really exciting night, I think. I'm really looking forward to playing the album in full and getting your insights on it. But before we start, I thought it'd be a nice idea to kind of set some kind of context, because it was a different world 20 years ago. Diana had just died.
Yeah.
An amazing new radio station had just launched. And you released what became an album that went on to sell 10 million copies worldwide. It's become a benchmark of quality, I think, in British music and world music, really. And it changed your lives, I suspect, in different ways.
Very much so, yeah. It's and I think you're completely right. The context was quite, constructive towards that album being the thing that it was, really. I think there was a feeling with us that time had come around to our way of thinking, really, and the timing of it. There was something about 97. We've had this discussion a lot, obviously, lately with the anniversary and the rest of it. But it's, I think it definitely, there was something afoot, definitely then. And a common theme for me really is that I think the currents were kind of working in our direction. I don't know whether it was to do with political climate or just what was happening socially. But I think the pride in music that produced all those records at that time, I think that's got a lot to do with people trying to formulate a way of coping with what living in the UK meant at the time, really. And I think in that respect, it's a sort of document of that, really. Britpop is this thing that gets bandied about, and I don't really understand our place in that sort of genre, if you like. But I think we definitely tapped into something that was a current at the time.
Yeah. And I guess, of course, we should mention that there had been a Labour victory in the election just a few months before. Yeah. So it seemed as if a new era was starting.
A new hope.
A new hope was springing forth.
It did feel like that at the time. And we weren't to know. Everybody was absolutely made up in our camp, I think, about Tony Blair. I remember being out on that night and being I was completely out of it. But it was just like, wow, things are changing now. And I think because we come from, obviously we're Thatcher's children, we had our milk stolen and stuff, so there was I wasn't really engaged in politics back then, because I think the general feeling was apathy, because we couldn't engage with a government that didn't represent us. So I think that very much had an influence on a lot of bands, that we all retreated into our own little sort of universes, really, and built our own culture between us. And whatever you say about it in hindsight, it was a culture that we needed for our own sanity, really, and that produced a lot of good music also.
Yeah. And the context of the band is an interesting one, because this was the Verve's third album, and yet you'd split up and kind of got back together in a slightly different formation. When you were making Urban Hymns, what was the feeling amongst you all? Was this like, now that we're back together, we've got to make the most of this moment?
Well, I'll answer the first part of that, because obviously the story's slightly larger than my part, because I was, informally dismissed from the band in '96. So that it's not as cut and dried as it first appears. But obviously Si and the other guys continued as the Verve for a year before my reinstatement, as it were. And yes, you're right, we had two records and quite a long time of struggling, brain fart there, and not really feeling like we were getting anywhere, and somehow not becoming too demoralised by that. Just, I think one of my cliches is that you have to learn to squint with this whole being in a band business, really, and make sure that you don't look at the big picture too often, and we become masters in that, really. And I think we were just ploughing ahead regardless, because we knew we were true to the original ethos of the band, and we cared about what we did basically. And sometimes that's the only thing that'll keep you remaining sane and keep you committed to forwarding the cause. But I think Richard probably knew that it was time for a reboot, and I think my dismissal coincided with that notion occurring to him basically. So we didn't chuck the baby out with the bathwater, because what you have really is the emergence of a songwriter during a Northern Soul, and obviously that's anathema to the way that we used to do things. But we still applied the method. When it came down to creating urban hymns, we were provided with a new sort of format, really, a skeleton of acoustic songs, and the 4 other members went and worked on these things for a good year, mastered a massive amount of material with 3 different producers. What it was lacking was unity, really, and I think it could have been the proliferation of producers that had an impact on that lack of unity, really, because notably when we did come to finish Urban Hymns, when I was back on the team, as it were, there was no producer involved, and youth had long departed the scene, and it was kind of left up to us to make those sort of defining decisions that made it this unified work. But the year beforehand, you spent quite a long time, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely no feeling of like, wow, we're going to make this amazing record, because we had a huge part of the band was missing, and that was Nick, really. And I'd never come to terms with the fact that Nick wasn't there. So when it was a matter of carrying on with Nick not being there, it was we couldn't approach it in the same way that we did as a band when Nick was there, obviously, which was a big part of just playing off the cuff, a lot of jamming involved, a lot of free-form sort of expression. Suddenly, if you've not got a lead instrumentalist, that whole aspect of your band's gone. So I felt completely lost, to be honest, after Northern. So I didn't know how it was going to work. Obviously, Richard was emerging as a songwriter, but did he have it? He didn't really have enough quality songs, in my opinion, at the coming straight out as a band to form an album. So there was a lot of struggle in rehearsal rooms. Playing, Richard playing guitar, trying to fill that void. We got our friend Simon in, who we were at college with, to play guitar, who completely different stylistically to Nick, hadn't grown with us in that approach of jamming through music. So it was going into the unknown without Nick, and it wasn't a nice unknown for me, because it felt like the band was being wrestled away in a sense. Like, it didn't, it's kind of, well, we can only do songs that are put forward now because there's no way of jamming, really. So to me there was a new element, which was Richard writing songs, but it didn't really fulfill it for me of what a band was about, really. It was severely lacking. In the day that Nick came back was like the biggest sigh of relief, really, for me, because I'm not sure the record wouldn't have come out without Nick. It was an incomplete record with a.
Well, it was very sort of studio construct, wasn't it, really? Because things had been built up in the studio, and I think if there was anything that was really obvious to me when I came back to it, it was that it didn't have that sort of linear thread in it, really, that we had before.
It didn't have an identity in that sense either, did it? I think the only sort of common thread was Richard's voice, really. Yeah. Even stylistically, some of the songs would be jumping from one thing to another, and
so things would be loops, and then there'd be bits of keyboards put on and stuff like that. And
ideas.
They were kind of satisfying pieces of music, but they didn't have the development, really, did they?
Yeah.
And I think probably because you've been through. Because what you hit upon there is probably key to it, really, in that the three of us developed something together over several years, didn't we? And then Tongi kind of came quite late to that and hadn't, as accomplished as Sai is, he hadn't developed the vocabulary that we perhaps have between us. And because of that, I think there was this hope that you would hit upon the right producer and that it would somehow start to cohere into something.
It never happened.
And,
exactly.
Right, and that's when you realised that there was
Well, it wasn't-
a missing Nick-shaped
Yeah,
hole.
it was probably a realization of all of us. Like right from the start, I was absolutely I was just gutted. You know, I never really came to terms with it. But Richard, out of the blue, one night, without even telling anyone, just rung Nick up. And the next day, it seemed like the next day, obviously my mind will have erased a couple of weeks. Nick was in the studio finishing the record, and everything was great, and everyone was elated, and finally we could see the end, you know. So it's very weird, you know, because people do talk about, oh, you must know, what was it like writing those songs, doing those songs? It was so disjointed over a course of a couple of years, where you thought you'd lost the band that you loved, and then for it to finally come together, the ups and downs of it were crazy, really, looking back in hindsight. You know, Bittersweet Symphony was just a loop with a melody over the top, and wasn't really in full development until Nick came, and you know, things happened like little dominoes. The strings were put on. Nick came back. The rhythm track changed. Everything just seemed. The chemistry came back, and we could talk the same language, a language that was missing before. You know.
So, at what point did Nick get that call then from Richard?
It was a couple of days after New Year's Eve. Actually, it would have been the first, maybe the 2nd of January in '97.
Right.
And within the month, I was back down in London, sofa surfing. Si putting up with me, and Pete putting up with me over in Willesden Green, wasn't it? Yeah. And I just sofa surfed through rehearsals and the first stint of recording, and then they put me up in a hotel for a bit. Because we had a budget then as well. I think by the time they
We'd blown the budget.
yeah, the budget had been had and spent before I came back, really. So
and that's the other thing about the 90s. It seems to me now, and you only realise in hindsight, that it's the last sort of age of
money,
record company decadence and expenditure.
Yeah.
You know, it's like a kickback to the 70s, really. Like,
I think they thought it would never end.
yeah, they thought it'd never end. Great to be involved in, but you know, it's a different story now. Like some of the things we spent money on, it's shocking now to look back.
I remember turning up at the studio, and there's all these like vintage guitars all over the place, and I'd had to sell mine like the year before because I had no cash, and it was like
How painful.
vintage 335s and stuff. But it meant I got to play some nice guitars for a change, really. But yeah, it was just sort of the amount of money that was ploughed into that. And I think they thought, the record company thought, well, we got short of Nick now, and he's just into all this weird prog rock nonsense, so let's put some money into these guys now.
The best
and then they got me back again.
the best snapshot of that is the Kill Your Friends book, isn't it, of the 90s?
Oh, yeah, and that's the year as well, isn't it? And it was
year.
pretty much...
People in that,
we
I'm
knew.
sure that I know as well. Have you read that book?
Yes, yeah, amazing book.
So you know those characters.
That's
So, from a distance now.
yeah. So I'm told.
Apart from the excrement and all the kind of horror,
the dark serial
the rest of
killer
it's
stuff.
real, isn't
Killer
it?
stuff, yeah.
But really, things happen quickly. So what? You get a call a couple of days after New Year's Eve. You start working by the end of January, and by September, the end of September, Urban Hymns, the album is finished. And it's out there.
Yeah.
So things moved quickly. Once, in a way, what Simon's talking about, the four people who originated the group got back together. No.
Yeah, it needed an impetus, I think, really, and I suppose it, maybe I was a catalyst in that, and then definitely my role in the studio was kind of sifting through like a box of gems, really, and trying to put them into some sort of order, which might have just been, pressing the mute button on a couple of things, really, given that things were born out of loops and stuff. So it was really quite an easy task, to be honest. And I think, sorry to repeat myself here, but Owen Morris' apocryphal comment about the band is that we do producers' heads in, and they're better off without them. And notably, we didn't have a producer for that last 4 months of tying it all up, really. And I think not having that extra party who doesn't necessarily speak your language to have to get your ideas across to, or have the sort of self-justifying conversations that we probably had previously, as great as the producers are that we've worked with. There's always a tension between what you're trying to explain and having to explain it in the first place, really, because otherwise it's as natural as breathing. You just get on with it, you get the thing done, and we all know what we're talking about between ourselves. So it all happened really rapidly, and it was a lot of fun as well making that record. I think, you know, the myth that's grown up about the band, if you've been a fly on the wall at any of those sessions, you would have seen the opposite, really, because we had a lot of fun.
It was exciting every day.
It was exciting, yeah.
It was like, all right, new day, what are we going to hear today? Because we probably couldn't see the wood for the trees, and Nick had pure focus because he hadn't heard these tracks. I'd been in with 4 different producers and had done 4 versions of
I didn't have the crisis that you did about it, because you were like, you know, you were wondering whether these things were ever going to get finished.
Absolutely.
And whether they were actually any good at all. And for me, it's like, it's that easy, this stuff. It just needs this.
That's interesting. I mean, I think you
couple of takes, this guy as well. Like, you know, there was no messing
But
about.
it's good when you know what you want to do as well, because I think previously we'd made a rod for our own backs with that whole improvised jamming thing, that you're waiting for the magic to happen all the time. But when you've got like a framework of songs, I can hear things that, you know, frequently when I get work on other people's records these days, they'll send me something, I can hear what needs to be on it straight away. And that's exciting as well. And I think that's infectious, really, when you have the clarity that's maybe got lost there. Because I did feel like I'd walked into a room with people that were just
I can imagine
a little bit stranded, really.
Absolutely.
But then you became united again, and you can hear that unity on the record.
I think so. Yeah, I think it's for all its sort of slightly dark themes and stuff. It's quite a jubilant record as well. Really, it's uplifting in its way.
Yeah. And we're going to be uplifted by it tonight. We're going to play you the whole of Urban Hymns. Nick and Simon are going to talk us through it track by track, and the first of those tracks is Bittersweet Symphony. It's up next on Radio X. It is The Verve on Exposure, Radio X with Bittersweet Symphony, the opening track to the Urban Hymns album, now 20 years old, and I'm playing you the whole thing tonight. I'm John Kennedy, and with me are Simon Jones and Nick McCabe from the band, and Bittersweet Symphony, opening track, a track that had already soundtracked a lot of the summer of 1997. It seemed to be omnipresent then. It seems in some ways to still be omnipresent now. It's a song that never goes away. You still hear it, used, both played on radio, like Radio X, we play it all the time, but used on TV a lot, and it still sounds amazing. But it's great to hear the full album version, I think. You know, hearing the full thing again, not just a snippet in passing, really shows you how powerful the song is. Can you remember when your first memories are of the song?
In its finished form,
or in an embryonic form? Yeah,
I mean, in its embryonic phase, it was just a loop. And Richard had the vocal ideas, some of the lyrics, not all of it. So
it was a loop that you sourced, actually.
I don't think it was. I think Wayne had it.
Yeah. But you had that, your decision to loop it, that was key to it, wasn't it?
I don't think so.
But Wayne used to play it out.
He used to play it out
before we came on.
So it was in our consciousness.
Right, so he would play the Andrew Loog Oldham orchestra.
Just when we're doing a gig, just beforehand, you know, playing tunes that we like and stuff. And obviously, you know, Richard came in with an idea to loop it. It was in the Real World sessions with John Leckie, actually. He looped it, and Richard sung over.
So it wasn't a youth.
No. And it was a great idea, and we were quite excited about it, but not to the extent this is the lead album single to the album or anything. And it kind of, because it didn't have any changes, it was just the monotony of the loop.
Had you looped the drums as well?
No, it was just straight off the record. No one else added anything to it at that stage. Did Pete go in and play? If he did, it was kind of irrelevant because it was just really static. There was nothing exciting about it apart from the melody was good and the lyric, Bittersweet Symphony. And it was always there when we went in with Owen. I think we might have redone it again. It was only really when we went in with Youth that we started to build it up and say, this is the arrangement. It was totally defined by the lyrics. It became exciting only on the day. I'd say that the full strings were put on it with Youth at that point. Then it became more dynamic because of the strings. But it still wasn't, you know, because it's quite long, the album version. It wasn't really, you know, single wise. we thought it was, but we always thought everything we did could be a single, like, as you do. It was only on playback when Nick came back and really added his Nick McCabeisms to it for me, that it started to take on a sort of three-dimensional feel, really. And at that point, there's moments where you're on the sofa at the back of the studio thinking, this is unbelievable, this sounds amazing. But it wasn't the first time we did it, it sounded amazing. Absolutely no way. It took a long time to develop, because it's not an approach that we'd ever used before. Sampling a bit of music, looping it, melody over the top. I mean, that was all it was. Now, you listen to it, if you took out the loop now, you probably wouldn't even notice, because there's so much music that we put on.
The string line is the defining thing, and that's not on the original.
It's not even on the original.
Which is amazing, isn't it? I mean, it's sad to say, but that is almost the bittersweet aspect of the song.
I'll tell you a key moment in playback, actually. I think it was Youth that suggested it. I can't even remember. Correct me if I'm wrong. Take that string line that's the intro that we know is the introduction now, was never written on the scores that the orchestra was playing. That was never the introduction. They just came in after the four
That was
count.
my suggestion.
That's why I said correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
So someone said, and it's Nick, put that string as an intro on its own. As soon as that became the introduction to the song, then you have the hook.
Well, what I was going to say was,
at that point, it's like, oh my God, that makes total sense now, because you hear that later on, and that's the hook. That was the moment when we all kind of looked at each other and thought, this is going to be massive, you know.
But I've been working with loops for a long time at that, because what I kind of don't think of myself as a guitarist. It's something I've ended up doing out of bloody mindedness, really. But I've been working with electronic music for a long time, since I was 14 years old. But I know about loops really getting static, and there's this phenomenon known as loopitis, where you kind of end up with 4 bars that are really good, but they don't go anywhere. And the strategy was dead simple to me, because I've been there before, really, that what it didn't have enough elements in it that you could then do the dub-style mute button directive thing, which is like, taking elements out and using that as a way of re-injecting dynamics into it. And it was just one of those things that this is a static loop, and what it needs to do is it needs to build, it needs to drop. And I basically did a little sketch for it, and that got programmed in. What it needed first, though, was it just needed more elements that could be brought in and out. And so something like MSG, which was the B-side at the time, I think that stands for McCabe Synths and Guitars, but it's basically all the extra stuff that gave us the space to do the sort of builds and drops, really. So
we should say that the MSG you can get on the deluxe version, the super deluxe version of the new remix. It's important stuff. It's out tomorrow.
Very true. It's a great version, that, and it does show the simplicity, and it shows what's left when you take out that loop, because everyone thinks that loop's so pivotal, like it was to the kind of starting process, but it became less significant later on.
MSG is interesting as well, because what it doesn't have on that track is it doesn't have the reprogrammed drums, and between me and a programmer who came in, we recut the drums that day. And I know Richard likes to talk about hip hop a lot these days, but we were always hip hop fans, and it did inform. We were always keen to avoid the things that were touchstones for us, but obviously, as you acquire inspiration from things, you deploy some of that subconsciously sometimes. So when the drums got recut, that's kind of in the back of my mind. I was going, the swing factor thing that you'll find on MPC drum machines, for example. We went for that, and basically, it's that sort of fine line between, is this a band piece of music or is it a program piece of music? And I think that tension's always interesting to me, rather than the sort of polar opposites of, this is a band piece, this is a dance piece, really. So in that sense, I think it's almost like a success that was a bit anomalous, really, of its time, in that it managed to integrate those two things in a way that, because like prior to that, you got people like Jesus Jones that it sort of, didn't quite work, really. Yeah. So I think it's one of those things that when I hear it now, I'm always quite surprised how well that actually works, rather than because it doesn't particularly sound of its time, or it could be from any year, essentially, really. So,
but there were real drums on it.
There were at one point, and then it got cut, and it got treated like a break, essentially.
Well, they're Pete's drums that have been
sampled and chopped,
sampled and programmed as well. You know, they played live and then entered into drum machine with the, like Nick's talking about, the swing factor that gives it a sort of
it's lope,
the X factor.
Like. It's got its swagger there, really, hasn't it?
Obviously, you know, the lyrics in that song are unbelievable. Probably one of the best things Richard's ever written. I heard it yesterday on the radio by chance. My wife said to my son, do you know who this is? He's like, oh, Mum. One of those moments, but it still amazes me. I reading the comments on YouTube about what it means to people. That song, it's taken on a life of its own. It's nearly 500 million people have listened to that on YouTube. That takes me.
That's
aback.
It's a very depressing sentiment.
That's just YouTube. Yeah, but it's
the delivery, though, isn't it?
The comments that people make and how it's affected. I've been searching for this song for 10 years. I finally found it means a lot. It's not just because it's like, I like that catchy string. It's actually like the weight of the lyrics. I think in a pop song still takes me aback sometimes when I hear it. It's like everyone can relate to that. Like, you know what I mean?
And Richard was clearly on a roll with writing these lyrics. On so many of these songs, he had mined some moment of inspiration.
I keep coming back to the fact that his mindset was the best it's ever been, really, that year. I think personally he seemed happier. He was more open. It was very pleasant to be around Richard back in those days, and he was like the ringleader. I think one of the things that gets forgotten about the job of the frontman, as it were, is to kind of like not only keep the audience on its feet, but the band on its feet as well. And he definitely cared about the psychology of the band, I think, back then. And I don't know what happened to transform his sort of taking things, because obviously Northern Soul is a really dark record, but he just hit this seam of kind of... I don't think he was going for universal themes. I think he universalised after the fact when he did like the editorial on what he'd written, because all those songs are personal to him, but they've all been given the universal slant. But I kind of marvel really that he had that worldview at the time that was very outward looking and very, I think the word I keep using is generous of spirit, really. I think and I think people responded to that, really, that they heard their lives being detailed and itemised and set to, you know, glorious music, really. Because I think this is one of the things that we've all liked about music. When you like, you know, you want reality spelled out, but you want it to be spelled out in technical, really. And I think that is one of those tunes that just sort of, I mean, if you looked at the lyrics on a sheet of paper, you're not likely to see any beauty in that, really. But I don't know why it's just got this huge resonance, really. I think it's talking about people's struggle, really, isn't it? You know,
and yet, you know, there's something uplifting about it. There's something about, you know, this might be the reality, but combined with the music, it makes us think, yes, we can cope with that reality and we can move on. And then, you know, you follow that with more songs which tap into.
It's a big so what, really, the tune, isn't it? It's a sort of, it's like a sort of brushing away of that huge issue, really.
And on the album, you follow it with Sonnet, which is quite a contrast, really, the way it starts and the way it builds. But it has this lovely kind of soul-style rhythm guitar in it, this click.
Spandau Ballet.
Yeah. I'd skip that version.
See, here's the thing, right? I was going for Dionne Warwick Bacharach arrangements. Right. So I've flipped the script on anybody that says Spandau Ballet now, because basically, if you hear Spandau Ballet, you've not been listening to no good music.
That's very true, yeah.
Well, I mean, all they were trying to
do. No, I was going for Dionne Warwick, but you heard Spandau Ballet.
It's your lack of music knowledge.
I mean, sort it out.
I mean, that's what we listen to. That sort of thing. We'd be listening to Baccarat. We'd be listening to, you know, whether it's Dionne Warwick, Isaac Hayes, anyone from that sort of, you know, soul back. That's what we'd be into. Like, so to us, it wasn't a strange thing. It's only when someone else mentions a joke that people.
Ooh.
Oh, you don't do that.
Don't go there.
It's interesting he brought it up though.
Yeah.
Because it never occurred to me, honestly.
Yeah.
No, I've had that conversation a few times this last couple of weeks. So, and I thought about it afterwards. Yeah, it's not my problem that you heard Spandau.
Yeah,
play.
no, totally. I mean,
Yeah.
they were trying to emulate the same thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what I said.
Yeah.
But it lends the song a kind of classical quality in terms of the pantheon of pop music. Which roots it nicely. I think.
Well, I think we've always done that. Really, we've always had like reference points, because it'd be nice to be all avant-garde and convince the world that we're creating a new universe for music or whatever. But it doesn't work like that. So we've always kind of had an eye to things that are classic for us, but bringing our own personality to it, really. And I think that's what I enjoy about most music, really. That you don't want to be just suspended in outer space. Well, sometimes I do anyway. But you're looking at a pop record here. So when I was looking at something, because that was in a great state when I came to that tune. And I had to really sort of think cleverly about what I added to it, and the two things that seemed to be needed there was like something in the higher register that was doing something rhythmic, and then the thread of lowercase lead guitar, really, which is something that's my speciality, really. Like it's guitar solos that aren't really guitar solos.
Yeah.
It's one of my favourite bits, actually, where the lead guitar comes in.
I remember doing that
beautiful,
like yesterday,
beautiful.
and I had like sort of 3 or 4 stabs at it, and it was one of those things that I've got this rule really about guitar solos, that they've got to be spontaneous, because that translates to the record. I think really you can hear spontaneous and you can also hear stale. So each time I went in and did it, I was trying to sort of grasp for something that was a bit more, and there was that last one, and it was just, I think that's it. And we came in and listened to it, and it did its thing, really. It's but that was in a great shape. Out of all the songs that I heard, I thought what Tongi did on that, particularly the ambient stuff, I suppose people imagine that's my bag, really, but it's probably Tongi's contribution, is it?
It was very the way that they meshed together the two guitars, and that is a beautiful thing. And it's really, you didn't stamp on what he'd done. You didn't, you left what he'd done there. And
well, there was some talk of scrapping Tongi's stuff when I came back, and what he'd done on a lot of tracks was really tasteful, and he'd orchestrated, I think, a little bit, really, and he'd probably orchestrated himself into the background. And
it was a difficult task for him to come in at we were already established. He came in as our school friend and was fill his boots kind of thing. That's a tough call, because Nick's such an original player. It's not something you can.
Not something you'd want to do.
Yeah, want to do. Yeah, why? Si's a very different sort of player, but the way it worked was amazing. And in fact, way before that happened with Nick leaving and Si coming in, there was always talk of Simon coming at some point to help us out, because we were at sixth form college together, and he was in bands that we were all in. So,
but isn't it? I mean, in the sleeve notes of the new version, which is out very soon, Nick, you say that Simon Tong taught you, Simon, and Richard how to play guitar. So he's kind of involved somehow.
Exactly, he's always there on the periphery, when it was more of a case of when, really, and he just came in such, I suppose, going that first tour to him must have just been like, what the hell is going on now? Like, what I mean, because he'd never experienced just being on tour anyway.
Amazing. But we're going to hear the two of you working together beautifully on Sonnet. This is the Verve, Sonnet, Exposure, Radio X. You're listening to Exposure on Radio X. I'm John Kennedy, and that is The Verve with The Rolling People. It's the third track on Urban Hymns, the classic album that's getting the Exposure album playback treatment tonight. I'm playing you the whole thing, and I've got Simon and Nick from the band talking us through it track by track. And when you hear The Rolling People, when I remember hearing that for the first time in the context of this new album, Urban Hymns from The Verve, it brought me back to the kind of sounds of The Verve that I remember from the first two albums, that kind of feel of a band playing together, kind of in a way going who knows where. There's an unpredictability to that whole sound and groove that you conjured up, and it was great to hear, because it meant that this isn't a completely different band. This is the same band but trying out different things, and Bittersweet Symphony, Sonnet were two of those things, but the Rolling People was still at the very heart of what the Verve was all about.
I think we were probably in the process of trying to integrate the two things, really. And maybe one of the things that was frustrating for Richard on A Northern Soul was presenting things like On Your Own and History to us, and then knowing that the difficulty of bridging those two worlds wasn't going to be an overnight thing, really. But I think there's a newfound confidence, really. So we'd caught Rolling People a few times before. It's a hangover from A Northern Soul, and we'd actually been into demo that with Owen before we even started work on A Northern Soul. Owen Morris.
It was one of the lead tracks for A Northern Soul, wasn't it?
It
Or
was.
we thought it was.
We were hoping it would be, but I think I don't know what the sort of emotional problem we had with it, but there was a barrier really to making that happen. And I think the sort of newfound confidence that I had, I think that year off for me, it did quite a lot for my self-esteem and my confidence as well. And I think structuring something that we'd struggled with previously, that was another half of the problem that needed to be cracked, really. So not only did it need a good performance, it needed to kind of take shape in a good way, and we were the band to do that really at the time. I just think, that performance was just a piece of cake, wasn't it, really?
I think you're right. I think that's kind of key, is that, if you've got songs like Sonnet, Drugs Don't Work, Lucky Man, those kind of big three sort of more singer-songwriter thing, you're thinking in terms of verses, choruses. I think we came and played these songs, well, these have to fit into that mould as much as they have to fit with these, they have to be compatible in some way. And I think that focus that Nick's talking about and the structure of it and playing it with confidence made all the difference in the urban hymn sessions it did to A Northern Soul. It just quite didn't cut the mustard, did it?
No.
A Northern Soul.
It just lacked the authority and confidence,
right.
Really.
Yeah.
And 97, it was, we as a unit, we just worked really in 97. I think all the kind of festering issues that we'd had previously, they were kind of irrelevant in the face of the record that we were making, and we just had that confidence and chemistry, really. I think one of the things that we all agree on, the three of us at least, is that we just got better year in, year out. By the time we got round to playing fourth, by the end of that tour, that's the best we ever were, really. So the trajectory couldn't have been any other difference, really. And I'm kind of glad, really, that didn't get the proper treatment for A Northern Soul, because I think it kind of got the respect it deserved.
It wasn't ready as a song.
It wasn't ready. No, it was.
And so the version we hear on the album of The Rolling People, is that one take, or is that the four of you playing?
It's one of a few, I think.
Right.
Yeah, but it's a complete take, though.
Yeah.
It's not a Frankenstein in any way.
In terms of overdubs, there's very little on there, really.
It's great listening to it in stereo, as I was doing the other day. When you turn it up really loud, and
a lot going on, isn't there?
It's brilliant.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And you follow that with The Drugs Don't Work, which you mentioned just now, Simon. And I mean, that is another kind of pivotal song on the album. And how far back does this go in terms of? So if The Rolling People is from around A Northern Soul, same,
absolutely. Right. Drugs Don't Work was, I think, the radio sessions on there, because I got it wrong. I think there was some London, it might have even been Greater Manchester radio. Richard played it on way back on promoting A Northern Soul at the end. As that was winding down, Richard was living at my flat in Didsbury, and I think he wrote Sonnet and Drugs Don't Work there. Already knew that was going to be, that's before Nick left the band. Then we knew that was going to be, part of the next record as the Verve. So they were old songs, like,
Well, we didn't hear Sonnet during A Northern Soul.
We didn't hear. I did, though, in Didsbury.
Yeah. But The Drugs Don't Work got brought out.
It did.
It was as a sketch. And the lyrics were, "The drugs don't work, they make me worse" at the time.
Yeah, it was still going through changes. As it was being written, we hadn't played it as a band, but Richard had presented it to us and played it acoustically on a show. So it was in the batch. I think that was in the batch with History, really, but just too late to make it for A Northern Soul. But that went through a lot of changes arrangement-wise with Owen and John Leckie, and it was actually Owen Morris's version his arrangement that ended up going on the record.
I thought we
eventually.
recut that.
No, we did recut it, but it was when I say arrangement, the chorus structure, the verse, how it actually.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah.
But was Youth involved in this recording as well? Or?
Yes, yeah.
But the version that went on the album, we recut the Chris Potter.
I can't remember.
Richard and Pete went in and did the backing track, and then we grafted back on strings from the previous version.
Right.
And then, similar to Bittersweet, the builds, they were just mixing issues really. The delay in the drums, because the drums were in right at the beginning initially.
That's correct.
So,
the drums
so
came.
he
That was another
created
mute. That was correct.
Mute button directives.
You're getting my memory back here. I've not even thought about this stuff for so long.
Yeah.
But and your slide guitar on that was a defining moment. That was like Goose Pimples.
That's the Lindsey Buckingham thing.
Yeah, I
think,
remember the Goose Pimples when Nick did
Tonight I Am Lindsey Buckingham. Trying to do a bit of that really. But I like that kind of.
Gorgeous.
You just needed like a top line to wrap around what Richard was doing, and job's a good one. Really.
I forgot about that.
Yeah.
The drums did come in a lot earlier, didn't they?
It does sound great. And this is it. The drugs don't work. The Verve, Exposure, Radio X. It is The Verve, Catching the Butterfly on Exposure, Radio X. It's the 5th track on Urban Hymns, getting the Exposure album playback treatment tonight. I'm playing you the whole thing, and I got Nick and Simon from the band talking us through it track by track. Catching the Butterfly has Simon Tong's name on the credit as well in terms of the composition. So is this a representation of that 5-piece band that was working on Urban Hymns in 97?
Yeah, there's a few tracks we wrote that like, all right, we've got a new member, let's integrate, let's play as a band as we would 5 members on something that isn't preconceived. So that was one of the first jams that made the cut of the record.
We were still at Olympic, weren't we?
Yeah, we were at Olympic Studios.
I think at this point we got quite far into the sessions of like adorning what was already there and restructuring and all the rest of it. And I think we were feeling like maybe playing
much better than mine, Nick.
maybe playing would be a good idea. And I remember having the argument with Chris Potter about leaving the doors open at Olympic because they've got these big massive spaces, or rather they have these big massive spaces there, yeah. And Chris was very much of his time separation. Everything's got to be, he'd got to be able to take it out and all the rest of it. But everything just sounded immense in there once we finally plugged in. So we left for Rolling People and for the B-sides, and particularly things like Catching the Butterfly, Weeping Willow, which we'll get to later on. We left the doors open. So what you've got is this kind of invisible, well, what they'd call glue in engineering circles, which is actually bleed between instruments, really. I think that's where the sort of the massive size of that recording comes from, really. But that tune was out of a batch of things that ended up on B-sides, and it sort of comprises two jams, really. The one that got cut and edited on a very early Pro Tools system, and then I'd been away on a family thing for a weekend, and we came back, and I think there was some indulgence that coincided with me doing guitars for that and Weeping Willow that night.
Really? I really.
No recollection
my memory is.
But it was a bit like a nightclub that night when I did that. It was one of those things that I everything I did was immense, but it might have been more to do with the chemistry of the evening.
I don't know what you're talking about.
You don't know what I'm talking about.
But it's interesting hearing Catching the Butterfly and then Neon Wilderness. I mean, it reminds me of the Verve as a band who were kind of lost in their world and their music on stage. So I could listening to them again, I can easily imagine the two of them played side by side as you go on your journey, deeper into the night.
You know what? I'm so glad those tunes are on that record, though, because it gives it such more depth to what was before Nick came, and it's such a special record in that respect, because I thought that we were going to lose that aspect of the band, and I think that's why it was such a jubilant time when Nick came back. And like I say, probably the happiest of the band was that we were all, thank God we're back, we're back again, and it seemed that all the stuff we'd done before was for a purpose, because you always feel like, if it ends now, then what was the point? Do you know what I mean? It kind of made everything come together in a beautiful way.
And
like you say, Neon Wilderness, Catching the Butterfly, Rolling People Out, they're perfect examples, really.
Yeah.
You can't have everything be grand statements, really, can you? I mean, I think that's... This is one of the things that you learn through editing, really, that you have to keep the lulls in there as well. And I think, Neon Wilderness, it's a morning's worth of tinkering with a couple of bits of kit for me, but it serves as a, palette cleanser, really, on the record, and it's a bridge between lots of quite intense, full technical songs, and you need a breather, really, with that. And but Catching the Butterfly, again, I think, like Rolling People, it's a crystallised version of what we did before, and an improved version as well. It's got more focus, more clarity, and more sense of purpose, I think, than anything we probably did before. For me, I was always battling with the idea of where the tensions are, and things don't have to be tension all the way through. But I think we were getting quite adept at understanding, and that's to do with computers, really, understanding the sort of the linear flow of things, and knowing that this thing builds here, this thing dips here. You can take an objective view of things that hadn't been afforded to us previously, which is probably difficult to understand to a musician that's had those digital tools from day one. But for us, that was a revelation, that improvising, you can get a lot of interesting meat out of that just by removing yourself from the picture as a performer, and then and looking at it almost like a film editor, really, that you cherry pick the best moments of like that half an hour piece that you've just spewed out. I used to say it's like picking the carrots out of your sick.
Oh dear. What a great analogy.
That is an interesting description.
Sorry about that.
But in some ways, maybe that had relevance to the world of the verb at that time.
I wasn't doing that then.
And we get lost in this whole thing with Neon Wilderness.
What a great metaphor.
It is The Verve on Exposure Radio X with Space and Time from Urban Hymns. I'm playing you the whole of this album on its 20th anniversary. It's come out again in amazing deluxe form, and I've got Nick and Simon from the band talking us through it track by track. And it is, Nick, earlier just now, talking about Neon Wilderness and Catching the Butterfly, talking about how those worked as a contrast to the other sides of the album, and with Space and Time, and then the next sequence of songs, in a way, it's another side again of a band concentrating on kind of structure, I think, more.
Yeah.
No.
I think so. The other thing for me, really, is that a lot of what happened, stylistic changes from record to record, is to do what junk shop stuff I've been buying recently, because back in the days that you could get gadgets for like 10 quid, 20 quid, I used to do a lot of that, really. So a lot of that music is built from junk, really. Things that are now revered vintage pieces. To me, I was picking them up for like 10, 20 quid. But there was a piece of kit I had called a Lexicon Jam Man at the time, and they were blowing it out at Soho Soundhouse, as it was then, Turnkey, as it was later on, and then it's finished. And nobody knew what to do with this thing. It's a piece of kit that plays back what you've just put into it, and then you can put some more stuff on it. It's a looper, and everybody's got loopers these days, but I got mine for 100 quid with like full memory. And again, it's another vintage piece. So it was another bit of my vocabulary that I'd sort of developed while I'd been away. And so I was looking for little windows to use this thing all the time. And what I'd go and do in the morning before everybody else turned up, I'd go and get a Bloody Mary and some breakfast, and then I'd go in and plug all my stuff in, and things would come out. So things like Deep Freeze, which is at the end of the record, that ended up that was culled from one of these sessions, early morning sessions, where I just went and did these like sort of ambient soundscapes, really. And that one in particular, so there's a whole slew of those, and that one in particular, for whatever reason, it warranted stacking some other instruments on it, and it was one of those things that came together very, very quickly. And another one of Richard's sort of remarkable feats of improvised lyric writing, really. He just came up with that from the top of his head there as the music was running. It's got a bass loop, it's got a drum loop, and then Richard just went in and improvised these lyrics over the top. I've always thought it might have been about me, that song. I think it's definitely tallies with the life that I was leading at the time, and it's one of those incidental pieces of music. I always think it's a sort of soundtrack piece that really, or there's some kind of hint of Morricone in there or something. But Richard's lyrics really the defining thing. It's got that sort of 3 o'clock in the morning, everything's gone a bit wrong, and it's I have to kind of relate to the Boards of Canada thing there. Someone once described that as music that represents that night out you can't remember where you've ruined your life, and that's the sort of feeling I get from that, really, like a few years early. It's things have gone too far, here's the document kind of thing, really. But it later served another purpose as a segue live into the way it works on the record, essentially, into Weeping Willow. The two of them got merged, Yes style, prog rock style, into a song suite.
I'm all for
which
that.
Worked remarkably well, actually.
It did work.
Yeah.
There's a staple.
Yeah. But yeah, it's funny actually. I've revisited Yes. I could never stomach that back in the day. But they had their moments.
I just bought a compilation. There's a double CD set that celebrated their 35th anniversary or something. And I kept hearing these things around and thinking, actually, no, they all sound brilliant to me. I should go and explore further.
Can we talk about the Sex Pistols?
Not
right now. Because you're
here in 2017, everything goes, doesn't it? Yeah. It's funny because that prog element that people perceived it in what we were doing was like a no-no, and I think it turned a lot of people off, really. And none of us are virtuosos, but I think that idea of trying to keep things vast, and it's interesting that you had Radiohead on the other week. I think there was probably a few of us that had kind of said, okay, Britpop, too narrow, all this sort of post-punk concept of what music should be, it's too narrow, really. I think it's hard to kind of put that into context now, but back at the time, there was a lot of resistance to this bunch of scruffy hippies from the north. I thought I was a post-punk kind of guy, but apparently I was, a hippie. But I think that sort of personifies what worked about our kind of progressive ambitions. I listen to This Heat quite a lot, and which is prog, really, but it's prog that sort of has, some kind of soundtrack ambitions to its bow, amongst other things. And I think it contributes to the album as a bigger piece, really, in that it is this varied, multi-dimensional thing. And I think its inclusion there, I think a lot of people thought it was just like, what is this crap in amongst all these epic anthems? But retrospectively, it makes the album make more sense in that way, I think.
Yeah, no, I think Space and Time and Weeping Willow, they're crucial parts of the whole story. And this is Weeping Willow now. This is The Verve, Radio X. It is Exposure on Radio X. I'm John Kennedy, and that is The Verve with Lucky Man. It's the 9th track on Urban Hymns, the classic album that is just about to be reissued. And we got Simon and Nick from the band talking us through the whole thing, track by track. It's an epic conversation, and it's an epic album. And I mean, it's fantastic that it is getting this whole deluxe 5 CD amazing vinyl reissue and remaster, because it sounds fantastic again. And I think it's really great hearing these songs within the context of the album as well, because so many of them have had great long lives of their own that we do hear Lucky Man on the radio, we do hear these songs again, but hearing them within the spread and breadth and depth of the group really makes a difference, which is really exciting. Where did Lucky Man fit into the whole story of Urban Hymns?
Well, I remember playing that very early on, actually, in Bath, where Richard was kind of based at the time, and it was very much sung on an acoustic guitar, and we tried to get it to fit in the band format, and it was always never quite, we knew it was a great song, so I came up with a really good guitar line at the time, but it was in need of a lot of work, and I think it only started to make sense when Youth came down to the pre-production sessions, and he got me and Pete to completely simplify what we were doing, to give more space to the acoustic guitar, really, which was driving it. It was like a double time, fastly strummed piece. And what me and Pete were doing, it was too complicated and busy. He made us strip it right back, really simplified it almost to a Neil Young sort of Harvest sort of rhythm section. It's very sparse, really. And that's when it gave it its space, really. And that kind of worked from the off, because it was a fully formed song that Richard had written. It had the chorus, it had the middle eight.
And the bass solo.
And obviously the bass solo. You've cut that, you know what I mean? It was my defining glory on the album, or so I thought at the time. But that was one of the more finished ones, along with, Sonnet, Drugs Don't Work, Lucky Man, were the three most complete, I'd say, songs that Richard came to the party with, and that was, there was something still lacking there. Even it had the simplicity. It had gone through its changes from trying to be a rock song that it wasn't working in that format. Stripped it back, but it was just, I don't know. You describe it when you first heard it, because it was lacking in
hollow.
Something hollow. Yeah,
it was hollow. It was like. It was all top and bottom and nothing in the middle, really. And I think, again, working with Richard for the previous 6 years, what I'd learned to do is wrap something around, like another voice, really. It's like everything I did was geared to wrapping around his vocal. So it just needed another voice in there, I thought, really.
Very modest of you, because the guitar lines on that are really, really special.
But then that was a piece of cake as well, because I'm a huge Richard Thompson fan, and I just heard Calvary Cross. I thought it needs a line. There's a brilliant live recording of Richard Thompson doing Calvary Cross from the late 80s, and it's one of my favourite pieces. I'm not like a huge guitar fan, to be honest, but it's one of the few things that's absolutely blown me away over the years. And I heard that kind of spindly motif, really, that gets respun when it's reiterated. Really, I think Owen always found that very frustrating about me, that I'd play a line, but I'd always alter it from bar to bar. That's kind of me making sure things don't get boring, really, So those lines they're my Richard Thompson impression, essentially. And again, not pulling it off. I think there's something to be said for that, when you go for something but you fall short, i.e. Spandau Ballet, Dionne Warwick.
See, what's beautiful about a guitar part like that, for me, because if I hear those strings now, I imagine the guitar.
I know, it's
such
funny,
a hook
isn't it?
in itself.
Yeah,
the intro guitar on that is amazing.
Yeah. Well, there's a really irritating advert on YouTube at the minute. There's one for Dead Mouse, like Masterclass, and the other one is Hans Zimmer. And the question and answer thing. And I think there's been quite a lot of times that we've written notes on how things should work, and that whole blues sort of idiom of question and answer. I think once you've been improvising with a bunch of people enough, you kind of do that anyway. It's like you're having a little chat between yourselves.
So was that not
instruments.
Preconceived? Was that off the cuff when you came in?
It was the very first line.
All of us just thinking,
I picked
oh my
the guitar
God,
up
amazing.
and I played the line, and it just it came out. I was thinking Richard Thompson, and
that came.
I knew what key it was in, and it came.
Amazing.
Yeah,
amazing.
And then what I call cropperisms.
My
failed Steve Cropper impression.
The most amazing thing was I said, why I said to Nick, can you describe how when you first heard it? Because it was old to me by that point, and it was like it was falling short of the mark, And what you thought was so far away from being finished, even though it had the strings on it and everything, Nick came in and made this thing that seemed quite stodgy and unfinished. It was finished straight away. It was like, wow, that's the record. And all of us were like that. There was
a lot of them just needed to flow better.
Yeah.
That was the main thing that was missing.
You say
they
that
just
so
needed
modestly
to flow better.
as a guitarist, but to just come in and do that in one take or a couple of takes, and at the end think something that was so unfinished is now so complete and doesn't need anything. Just leave that alone now. It was an amazing thing.
A lot of what I did on it was I'd kind of do multiple passes of just flowing
No,
over the
I
top
remember
of it.
the process,
And then we go
yeah.
into Pro Tools and
Yeah.
go, that bit works, that bit's rubbish, that bit's
Well,
fine.
everyone knew which were because hearing it back through the
Yeah.
those big speakers, you
Yeah.
forget what it was like in the night. They had these huge, the speakers were as big as this room we're sat in now, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you hear it back and it's an experience. It's not, you're not just listening to
Yeah.
the song, you're
It's
having a
actually
musical
quite a negative
experience.
thing, I thought.
It
'Cause you
can
could
be
sometimes,
scary.
if it wasn't working,
Yeah,
it would
yeah.
really turn
Yeah,
you
you're
off,
hearing this
wouldn't it?
horrible
Yeah.
thing so loud. Like,
It's horrible. It's really loud and it's really horrible.
But
there
yeah,
were
all those tunes, when Nick came in and did things like Sonnet, Lucky
Yeah.
Man, they were instantly finished. Like, and that was the amazing thing, feeling so far away and then suddenly feeling quite near to the finish line, you know.
There's a couple of things that I questioned after the fact, like the guitar solo on Sonnet. I remember waking up in a cold sweat thinking, I just played a guitar solo. I'm thinking, that's so not post-punk Nick. That. But it was the right thing for the song. And similarly with Lucky
Is this
Man.
the same post
there's-
punk Nick that was talking about yes? And yeah.
And the same thing with Lucky Man. There's a big rock riff in there that I just thought, it needs it. I don't want to do it, but it needs it. And it was just that thing that it had to happen when it happened, and it's a cheesy device really, but it just like the song demanded it, so you have to
Gold top Les Paul out the bag.
yeah, exactly.
There you
Yeah,
go.
Marshall, crank your Marshall, get your cheese on.
And with One Day, which follows Lucky Man, I mean, that has an almost country feel to it, you know, or you could say, you know, that kind of early 70s Stones feel to it as well.
I think you were listening to
Definitely
lots of that stuff, really.
Yeah, I think the country thing you like to say
Grandpa
first
Parsons
is
and
the
all that,
grandpa sort of Neil Young. In Rich had Neil Young. John Leckie said it was like a Prince song. I don't know. I never. Maybe it's the falsetto. But yeah, I always got that sort of Neil Young sort of country rock mellow sort of vibe to it. It's a beautiful song. That actually One Day.
So again, the Lindsey Buckingham thing though, where he'll take something that's it seems quite trad, and then do the full production job on it really. And I think for me, when I heard that, it's like, this is a nice tune, but it needs some sort of ear candy element to it really. And I did all these loops and put them in
I was just going to say
with the Jam Man.
a good example of the Jam Man use on there. There's some backward sounding guitar things that you wouldn't think was a natural sort of fit for that song, but take it to another level.
But I think when you're doing textural stuff with guitar, it's things that it would sound really cheesy on like 80s digital synthesizer or something. You can get away with that kind of gloss with guitar. I call it dirty ambience. Really.
It's also the repetitive nature or something. You wouldn't play that as a static guitar line, but because it's in a loop machine, it's going round and it's not landing on the beat, and it's doing you can tune into something like that, like you're saying, hearing it in stereo. Suddenly you're hearing things that you might not necessarily hear on a phone these days, and it's swirling around your head. There's a lot of that element to that to the record.
I mean, most of the music that I listen to is just that. Really, it's just, no tunes, just ear candy. So I'm always trying to sneak that in, unfortunately.
So you take a nice country blues number like One Day and
turn it into a new age number.
And we're going to listen to it now. This is One Day. It is The Verve on Radio X. It is The Verve on Exposure, Radio X, with the penultimate track on Urban Hymns. That is Velvet Morning, and I am playing you the whole thing tonight. That's what I've been doing with Nick and Simon from the band, talking us through it track by track. Velvet Morning, a great way to kind of start winding things down in a way with the album. Where did this sit in the evolution of the record?
It's quite fully formed by the time I came back there.
Yeah, I think it was one of those ones that worked instantly, really. As it was, it didn't. Richard came with that song, and it was pretty much formed, and we played it as did we play as a band? Were you there when we did that?
No, it was recorded. I just dubbed to it.
Did you?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't remember like over labouring that or working with any other producers on that. I think it was during the Olympic sessions. So it was obviously one of the more newer songs that Richard came with. Very simple in its execution, and
it's like the best Neil Diamond tune that Neil Diamond didn't write, really, isn't it?
It is.
I think there's probably like that might have been the reason behind using the megaphone, really, to sort of, because there was like a sort of denial of influence, I think, there at that point.
So I was all right with Neil
You were
Diamond.
cool.
What's wrong with Neil Diamond?
Yeah.
But,
Well,
because
this is it. At the time, that would have been a
Yeah.
no-no. I mean, I would never have thought Bruce Springsteen would get the rehabilitation that he has done. Like, but everything's fair game.
He's
in
written some
2017.
tunes, hasn't he?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Neil
But
Diamond.
at the time, it was the
Middle of the
accepted
road, wasn't it?
behaviour to
Yeah.
dismiss all that stuff. When in fact, a lot of us grew up on,
Yeah.
you're talking about Simon
Sunday
Garfunkel,
radio, isn't it?
and
Neil Diamond. You know.
and they're big tunes, aren't they?
They are big. Yeah.
but Richard sang Velvet Morning through a loud hailer,
Yeah.
so the whole song, and to create
The chorus isn't. Yeah.
right
I can't remember.
to just kind of roughen it up.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, this is my impression, really, that I think by the time I got invited back, he felt that he'd made this big, shiny pop record. And I think when I was less generous of spirit about it a few years later, I said, Bon Jovi record. But it is. It's a big, massive pop rock, soft rock record, really. And it's, I think at a certain point, he must have panicked about that and thought, this has gone in a direction that I'm not comfortable with. And you're going to have to bleep me for this, so because I'm going to repeat verbatim what my instructions were, which was to fuck it up. And I'm not in the business of fucking things up. I like to think I improve things, really. So I think there was always this notion that we were flirting with the pop world, really. I think at that point he hadn't embraced it. He still wanted to make a big statement, and it was he wanted to make a Verve record which was bigger than any pigeonhole that having been used to getting pigeonholed quite a lot in the press and ridiculed a lot as well, he just wanted to make something that stepped outside all of that and make a classic record. And so certain decisions I'm pretty convinced were informed by that, like just taking a completely odd approach to how he recorded a vocal, for instance. But that song, it's like you don't even notice that there's a loud hailer on it, really. You just hear a classic song, really, that could have been written in any decade. And that's what shines through, I think, in the whole of the record, really.
Yeah. And the record ends with "Come On." I mean, you mentioned Deep Freeze. That's the if you're listening on a CD, then it looks like "Come On" is about 13 minutes long or something. But there's a quiet bit, and then it returns with a classic example of Nick McCabe alone in the studio with the Bloody Mary.
Yeah.
And that's the way that record kind of finally ends. But "Come On" is the last official track, and this seems like the kind of classic Verve mold of the band playing together, with that spirit of freedom and adventure and exploration.
Again, it's another tune that we'd approached before, but I think we were running out of bottle by the end of A Northern Soul, and we had it back in spades.
They were too
then,
big,
really.
weren't they? Those tunes.
They were too big for us. We were enfeebled. I think we were getting crushed by it, really, at that point. By the time we were back by the time we tackled them on Urban Hymns, I think we'd had that run together where we tackled all these contentious pieces that Richard and Si had been struggling with for a year, and we'd kind of nailed them, really. So by the time we went back into the studio, we were full of verve.
I like it. It was great doing "Come On" in the studio. I remember.
Yeah, it was.
Did Liam?
He did. He
played
snuck
with us
in.
live?
Yeah, he snuck in.
We actually did the take. Liam had a microphone set up as well, and them two are just screaming "Come on" at the end.
So Liam Gallagher.
Yeah. He's not credited. On
No, he's not.
I got welcome back
told-
Nick McCabe at the end of that.
dear.
It didn't make the cut, but
Didn't make the cut.
But I looked up and I was like, "Who's singing that?"
And it sounded all
there
through
is,
the advert. It just sounded their two voices blended together to a point. Is that really Richard? And it was both of them together.
Yeah.
Come on. The spirit was amazing, and it was a great way. I think it was the last thing we recorded, right near the end. It was a beautiful way to end the whole thing, and that sort of chapter as well, because we split up not long after. But that whole sort of we'd been on tour with Oasis a lot, and it was nice for Liam to come down, I think, and it was a nice moment, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was, the power, the rock power.
What a great way to end the record. But it's interesting, this whole remaster and repackage, because for a while after the album came out, you did tour together. You toured as the 5-piece version of the band, and that's documented with this new package as well, because you get the Hay Hall show. That's all
right.
5 of you playing together. Yeah. And so it's a really great way of bringing that period together in one place, especially for anybody coming to it and being able to witness the wonder in a way
back
that
to
was
97,
yeah. Now, which seemed, as you've been suggesting, was a kind of halcyon time for the band at this
definitely,
point.
Yeah.
And the future had other things in store, but
it always does, doesn't it?
Yeah. But the music lives on.
Deep Freeze seems like prophetic now, really, doesn't it?
Right.
Because then we went into deep freeze, didn't we? We had our moments of verve, and then we went into deep freeze again, didn't we? But yeah, it's a good sort of. I have to mention the downside is that what's missing from this box set is a lot of outtakes and new material from the era, and for various reasons, not our own, it wasn't included, but it probably points to where we were going next had we got there, but as a window into 97, it's a great thing, really. And again, I have to come back to the fact that we were just improving permanently as a band. By the time we finished fourth, we were never better, really. I think some of those performances, I was wondering how well they'd stand up, but they actually stand up pretty well. I think even the very last one where we split up, where I was in a bit of a state during the day, we played this last gig, and we heard that recently. It was not Dusseldorf. It was the south of France somewhere, wasn't it? But it's one of the best recordings. Yeah. Well, that happened to be. It happened to precede the split of the band by about 10 minutes. So it just shows really that incidents can change the whole destiny of how things unfold in a split second, doesn't it?
Yes.
But it's been brilliant having you here. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you, John.
And it's been brilliant being able to play these songs again on the radio.
Thank
and
you
this is
very
the
much.
last tonight then from The Verve. This is Come On Exposure, Radio X.